des années, des décennies et pour certains pays européens, des siècles. Nous sommes des alliés de longue date, nous avons beaucoup en partage, et que ce soit sur le sujet de l'Ukraine, sur les sujets économiques, sur les sujets démocratiques, nous avons beaucoup à accomplir ensemble. Il va donc de soi que nous aurons à cœur, et à mon avis, ce sentiment sera partagé de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, d'entretenir les meilleures relations. Vous m'interrogez ensuite sur notre attitude vis-à-vis de l'Ukraine, et je crois que sur ce sujet, il y a une très forte convergence de vues entre la Pologne et la France, qui ont été moteurs ces derniers mois pour réaffirmer un certain nombre de principes simples. Il ne peut y avoir de discussion sur l'Ukraine sans l'Ukraine. Il ne peut y avoir de discussion sur la sécurité européenne sans les Européens. Et il ne peut pas y avoir d'accord qui serait mauvais, défavorable pour les Ukrainiens et qui soit en même temps positif et favorable pour les Européens ou les Américains. Et c'est pourquoi nous avons, avec Radek Sikorski, beaucoup poussé nos collègues européens à activer tous les leviers à notre disposition pour faire en sorte que les Ukrainiens, lorsqu'ils le décideront, soient en position de négocier en situation de force. Le levier financier, avec ce prêt de 45 milliards d'euros agréé au G7, qui va permettre aux Ukrainiens de trouver des ressources pour financer leur effort de guerre. Le soutien militaire que nous apportons, chacun selon nos moyens, à l'Ukraine, avec la formation des soldats, avec la fourniture d'équipements. Les sanctions que nous avons prises à de nombreuses reprises, puisque nous en sommes au 15e paquet de sanctions adoptées contre la Russie, et que je sais que Radek Sikorski aura à cœur de faire adopter dans le courant de sa présidence un 16e paquet de sanctions pour mettre la pression sur la Russie et, je dirais, assécher les ressources qu'elle engouffre aujourd'hui dans cette guerre d'agression inique. Je poursuis avec le levier de l'intégration euro-atlantique de l'Ukraine. Radek Sikorski vient de parler des sujets d'élargissement qui sont au cœur des priorités françaises également. Et puis j'ajouterai à ces 4 leviers celui de la formule de paix du président Zelensky, dont un certain nombre de pays alliés de l'Ukraine se sont saisis pour lui apporter un soutien. Pour notre part, c'est du groupe sur la sécurité et la sûreté nucléaire que nous sommes mobilisés, avec un travail étroit avec l'AIEA pour faire en sorte que le risque provoqué par la Russie sur les infrastructures nucléaires ukrainiennes soit le plus limité possible.
Alors la France est bien évidemment le plus vieil allié des États-Unis. Si ce n'était pas le général Lafayette, si ce n'était pas la flotte française, on ne sait pas si la guerre d'indépendance aurait été gagnée par les États-Unis. Mais pour ce qui est d'un éventuel sommet États-Unis-Union européenne, je comprends cela comme une formule un peu spéciale. En fait, c'est la Commission européenne et les États-Unis qui doivent en décider et non pas la présidence tournante du Conseil de l'Union européenne. Et pour ce qui est de l'Ukraine, comme vous le savez, c'est un sujet que nous abordons au cours de chaque réunion du Conseil. Alors, bien évidemment, nous ne voulons pas que les décisions sur l'Ukraine soient prises sans la participation de l'Ukraine, mais pour l'instant, l'Ukraine ne demande pas l'engagement de forces armées extérieures sur son territoire. La première obligation de la Pologne dans le cadre de l'OTAN, étant donné que nous avons 600 kilomètres de frontières entre l'OTAN et entre l'Union européenne avec des pays qui ne sont pas forcément nos amis, comme la Biélorussie, nous devons tout d'abord donc protéger cette frontière. Nous sommes aussi un pays qui assure la plupart de l'organisation de la coordination logistique. Nous avons une grande plateforme à Rzeszów et c'est par la Pologne que transite 90% de ce qui est fourni à l'Ukraine. Alors bien évidemment, nous pourrions appuyer ou soutenir plus l'Ukraine si l'Ukraine exprimait ce souhait.
Avec Sikorski de souligner l'importance dans notre histoire nationale de la figure du général Lafayette, qui effectivement s'est embarqué à 19 ans sur le navire de la Victoire pour aller porter secours ou pour aller apporter des renforts à la jeune nation américaine qui voulait se libérer du joug britannique. C'est au même âge, à 19 ans, que des soldats américains sont embarqués sur les bateaux qui sont venus il y a 80 ans. On a, aux côtés d'un certain nombre de combattants polonais, libéré notre pays. Alors oui, pour certains, ça peut paraître un peu loin, mais pour nous, ça compte énormément.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Alors, nous avons aussi un général polonais, le général Kościuszko, qui a renforcé West Point.
Jean-Noel de Reuters. J'ai juste une question sur le président Macron a ce matin appelé aux Ukrainiens de mener des discussions réalistes sur les questions territoriales. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire concrètement de votre côté, monsieur Barrot et monsieur Sikorski? Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord que l'Ukraine doit mener des discussions plus réalistes sur les questions territoriales?
Merci pour votre question. Ce que le président de la République a dit, c'est qu'il appartient aux Ukrainiens de choisir le moment et les conditions de négociation de paix. Et que, dans ce contexte, chacun, au sein des pays, de la communauté des pays qui soutiennent l'Ukraine, devra jouer son rôle. Le rôle des États-Unis aujourd'hui, c'est certainement de continuer à soutenir l'Ukraine comme ils l'ont fait depuis le début de cette guerre d'agression. C'est ce qu'a fait l'Union européenne avec beaucoup de détermination, puisque nous sommes, si l'on prend les montants financiers, les principaux contributeurs du soutien à l'Ukraine. Ce qu'a dit le président de la République, c'est qu'il appartiendrait aux Ukrainiens, le moment venu, de s'interroger sur ces questions que vous abordez. Et il appartiendrait aux Européens de s'interroger sur les garanties de sécurité qu'ils pourront apporter pour faire en sorte que cette paix, lorsqu'elle adviendra, soit véritablement durable.
Alors, la Pologne pense que la solution la plus naturelle et la plus durable serait le retour aux frontières internationalement reconnues. Ce sont des garanties qui ont été fournies à l'Ukraine dans le mémorandum de Budapest et le président Poutine a négocié, ratifié et signé le traité de frontières entre la Russie et l'Ukraine de 2004. Toute autre solution devrait venir de l'initiative de l'Ukraine elle-même. Merci.
Conference of Ambassadors.
2013, et certains dans cette salle s'en souviennent. Mais depuis 2013,
since 2013, the world has changed greatly. The President mentioned it this morning at the Elysee when he was telling us that many things that we see today were unthinkable the last time you spoke in this very room. In 2013, we could not have imagined that Russia would trigger in Ukraine a unprecedented war of aggression on our continent since World War I. And the fact that I'm sure you will wish, as we did together, we've done now for almost 3 years, to support the Ukrainians as long and as intensely as necessary, with very clear principles. No agreement imposed on the Ukrainians can be favorable to Europeans or Americans. No decision can be taken regarding the future Ukrainian without the Ukrainians, and no decision concerning the future European security without the Europeans. And it's by activating all the levers available to us, we continue to support effectively the Ukraine financial lever with the loan that we agreed at the G7, which will allow us to bring 45 billion euros to the Ukrainians in this year 2025. The military lever with the training support. Poland's taken a major part of this effort in equipment. The lever of sanctions we adopted just before the holidays, a package of sanctions, new ones, the 15th sanctions package targeting Russia, that of Euro-Atlantic integration, and now you'll ensure during the presidency continuing the enlargement effort, and the lever of cooperation as part of the peace formula of President Zelensky. France was tasked with working group number 1 on nuclear security and safety. Let me recall that the biggest power plant, Zaporizhzhia, is in the hands of Vladimir Putin's Russia. 2013, when you spoke last time, we could not imagine that a presidential election on the territory of the EU could be cancelled following manipulations on social media. Well, it occurred a few weeks ago, and it's one of the issues that we have discussed a great deal these past few months, how to protect our democracy against interference, against hybrid threats, and Poland has suffered from that on many occasions, be it on the net, on the web, or through other means. Now, 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, 2013, when you visited us last time, the falling behind of the EU, or the risk of falling behind, wasn't as manifest as it is today. And since, and more recently, the report of Enrico Letta, Mario Draghi demonstrated that this risk is henceforth apparent, and we must accelerate our effort of competitiveness if we don't want to become an aging and vassal continent of the major economic and tech powers of this world. That's why we express wishes of success for the Polish presidency, so that security, prosperity and democracy issues, the work that you will preside over, may lead to concrete responses to the high expectations of our fellow citizens. Now, these ties that unite us to Poland, we've nurtured them this year by reactivating a trilateral format that has shown its proof in a few months, the Weimar Triangle. Back then it was Stéphane Séjourné, my predecessor, that you wanted to reactivate that. And from the very first weeks, embraced the fight against disinformation on the one hand, and that, of course, issues of European defense. And last spring, you had this very compelling expression that resonated a great deal in France, that a building for Europe, a second life insurance policy by strengthening European defense, one of the priority issues of your presidency. And more recently, this format that allowed us to express ourselves together with Alan and Barrot to affirm our disapproval of the actions of the Georgian government against its people that today resolutely aspires to continue its path to the EU. And I'm not forgetting the depth and solidity of our bilateral relations, of our historic friendship, of our fraternity of arms, as recalled by the President on the 12th of December last when he was in Warsaw, fraternity of arms that we commemorated on the Normandy beaches in June. Let's recall the decisive role played by Polish soldiers in liberating our country. This historic friendship, this fraternity, will be enshrined in 2025, a new treaty, Treaty of Nancy, that will cover all the areas of cooperation and will open a new chapter in our relations. I thank our ambassadors present here and who are working actively to bring about this new treaty. So, dear Radek, it's an honor to have you with us. We're very impatient to hear you present your priorities, and I'd like to express to you on behalf of the great family of French diplomacy our gratitude for your presence with us today in Paris.
Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, chers amis français.
Ministers, ambassadors, dear friends.
Congratulations on your reappointment, and thank you for inviting me again. The first thing I did on arriving in Paris this afternoon was, of course, to visit Notre Dame. You know all about its significance in French history, but perhaps you may not know that it also features in ours. It was at Notre Dame on September 10th, 1573, that Prince Henry Valois took the oath to abide by a set of principles which came to be called Henrician Articles. These were unchangeable super laws, in effect a written constitution, which obliged the king to consult with Parliament on a regular basis, to consult with the Council of Senior Senators, which guaranteed religious freedom and barred him from waging war without the nobility's consent. Only then could he come to Poland and assume the crown as our first elected king. These regulations, very modern for their age, were in effect for 200 years, but eventually succumbed to corruption and paralysis. Our reforms came too late, and neighboring powers, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, were ready to take advantage. Failure to adapt to changing circumstances wiped Poland off the map for well over a century. There is a lesson in this history, namely that we should change when circumstances change, particularly in times of great disruption. Ladies and gentlemen, as some of you might remember, I spoke to this conference before, 12 years ago, and of course I reread my speech. Alas, some things haven't changed. I talked then of an increasingly unstable international order, different crises here in Europe, strategic shifts in American policy as ever. But we then didn't, as the minister said, address one issue adequately, namely Russia's greedy imperial ambitions. All I can prove, thanks to WikiLeaks and American diplomatic telegrams, that I did warn allies that what Russia was doing in Crimea was ominous. But Putin's aggression against Ukraine has shaken the international order. It undermined our collective security. And once again, Europe must face a violent threat coming from the east. Poles and Frenchmen have collaborated before. At the beginning of the 19th century, young Poles flocked to join Napoleon's army. They, of course, dreamed of restoring an independent Poland. They fought alongside the French in Italy, in Spain, in Russia, but, you might not know, also in Haiti. 2 demi-brigades, 6,000 men, were sent there to restore colonial rule. But remarkably, many of the Poles could not bring themselves to fight in other nations struggling for independence. In recognition for their help, they were later awarded Haitian citizenship. And alongside the Germans, believe it or not, they became the only whites allowed to buy land in Haiti. These privileges, written into the Haitian constitution, were suddenly revoked only in 1974. What happened? At the Football World Cup, Poland demolished Haiti 7-0. As Pope John Paul II once said, out of all the unimportant things, football is the most important. Back to Napoleon. 100,000 Polish soldiers, more than 16% of the combined French forces, took on the Russians during the disastrous campaign of 1812. Marching on Moscow was, of course, a disastrous mistake. Had Napoleon not attacked Russia and instead did what we asked for, limited himself to helping us restore our own state, he would have gained a reliable ally to protect his eastern flank. The retreat from Moscow might not ever have happened. The threat from Moscow might have been pushed back for longer, and Cossacks might never have reached Paris. He himself might never have visited St. Helena, and France might have remained a superpower for longer. Perhaps drawing on the right lesson from this, France backed Polish efforts to put their country back on the map, not only diplomatically but in practice at the end of World War I. In June 1917, a Polish army in France was created by the decree of President Raymond Poincaré. Some of its soldiers crossed the Atlantic from the United States to join the fight. The 70,000-strong corps was known as the Blue Army of General Halle. It was blue because it wore French uniforms. Alongside Halle's troops, a young French captain arrived in Poland. His name? Charles de Gaulle. In 1919 and 1920, a 400-strong French military mission was operating in Poland with a task to advise the newly formed Polish army. And in the summer of 1920, Lenin's Bolshevik hordes advanced on Warsaw. They aimed to spread Soviet communism across Europe. Imagine what a disaster that would have been. But they were driven back by a Polish army that operated French tanks and French aircraft. The significance of this battle and of France's assistance was obvious. In 1921, Józef Piłsudski, the architect of Poland's independence, took off his own uniform, the Order of Virtuti Militari, our highest military decoration, and personally decorated Marshal Foch with Poland's highest honor. One of the main streets in my home city of Bydgoszcz bears the Marshal's name to this day. And in 1922, Charles de Gaulle was awarded the Virtuti Militari too. In 1923, the President of Poland awarded Foch the rank of Marshal of Poland, a title commemorated on his catafalque at Les Invalides. 2 decades later, as you know, Germany and Russia were at it again, with Hitler and Stalin initially trying to share the world between them. And I'd like you to remember the diplomatic game that preceded the invasion of Poland in 1939. Hitler demanded the ceding of Gdańsk and an extraterritorial corridor to East Prussia as a test of Poland's willingness to join his anti-Comintern axis. Poland could have accepted Hitler's demands and defer the start of the war. Had we done so, Hitler had every intention to attack France first. But we stayed loyal to the Franco-Polish Treaty, and in addition, we accepted the British guarantee. Polish authorities calculated that by putting up the fight, they will create a golden opportunity for France and Britain to take preemptive action against Germany, thus engaging Hitler on two fronts right from the start. They believed that Britain and France would do what was clearly in their own best interest. They miscalculated because the second front was only opened 5 years later, but they were not wrong. Please admit that it would have been better to have stood up to a madman in power sooner, not only for Poland and for France, but for all of mankind. After the war, as the Western Allies were celebrating the V-Day, the nations of Central Europe saw the Iron Curtain fall, stranding us on the wrong side. We resisted, of course, as ever. During those long years of Soviet rule, France became a safe haven for so many Polish writers, artists, intellectuals, and journalists. Poland is forever grateful for France's support for our cause over this period. By helping us bring down the Iron Curtain, you helped millions of Central Europeans and the cause of freedom. You helped France as well. 3 decades of Poland's remarkable economic growth have produced new opportunities for us, but also for French and other international companies. Today we host 1,200 French businesses, which have created around 250,000 jobs. French entrepreneurs have successfully invested 25 billion euros, ranking France second only to Germany in foreign capital involved in Poland. In 2023, our bilateral trade exceeded 35 billion euros. The value of French goods exports exceeded 13 billion euros. That's a threefold increase compared to 2003, a year before Poland joined the EU. In recent years, French companies operating in Poland earned almost 2 billion euros in annual profits. So I'm confident in encouraging French entrepreneurs to invest in Poland even more. It will pay off. This excellent relationship would not have been possible without the 2004 EU enlargement. The upcoming Polish-French Treaty on enhanced friendship and cooperation should bring us even closer. Ladies and gentlemen, the call of freedom always resonates with French and Polish people. Today, the call for freedom comes from Ukraine. We are yet again challenged by an imperial Russia and its enablers all over the world. Ukraine has suffered mightily after 3 years of war. But the threat posed by the Kremlin to Europe and to the global world order itself may seem almost abstract. The day before yesterday, 4th of January, marked 65 years since the passing of one of France's great writers, Albert Camus. In The Plague, written almost 80 years ago, the townspeople of Oran long refused to accept the ghastly risks they face. The danger seems unreal, even as the first victims die. There have been as many plagues as war in history, Camus writes, yet always plagues and wars take people equally by surprise. Maybe we were all naive. Maybe we all thought that the practical and moral benefits of peaceful cooperation in Europe should be obvious even for Moscow, that those greedy imperialist wars of the past could and would never occur. Yet here we are, Europe once again having to deal both with war and a plague of nihilistic ideological extremism spreading outwards from the Kremlin. And in just a few days, we'll see a new US president whose own policy towards Europe is still an enigma. So, two very big questions. What's the right policy towards Ukraine and Russia now? What does all this mean for Europe and Europe's integration? First, Ukraine and Russia. Can our Europe be resilient, united, efficient and respected with Ukraine crushed and a victorious, emboldened Russia right on our borders? If we believe in European integration, and Poland, we believe, is a startling success story of European integration, should we stop spreading our prosperity and stability further east and south? If we want a reliable partner in Russia in future, can we achieve this goal by sacrificing Ukraine, by rewarding aggression? If you say no to all these questions, we share the same strategic outlook. Ukraine deserves peace. Ukraine needs peace, but it should be peace on fair terms, not a capitulation. We should not impose strict time limits on our support for Ukraine. That would simply encourage Russia to keep fighting. Instead, we should do everything we can to improve Kiev's position in any future talks. We may soon face pressure to cut a deal with Moscow, but what sort of a deal might a sane Europe accept? Definitely not a facile deal that simply allows Moscow to reculer pour mieux sauter once it has gained some strength. Europe is much stronger than Russian leaders think, and Russia is much weaker than her propaganda says and that many Europeans believe. Russia has lost up to 200,000 soldiers. Hundreds of thousands more have been wounded. Despite generous signing up fees, Russian men are now reluctant to join the army. With stocks of Soviet-era weaponry depleted, Putin is also running out of equipment, such as tanks and armored vehicles. Russian economy faces surging inflation. Ordinary citizens see prices of basic goods increasing at an alarming rate. State-controlled companies in Russia no longer stream billions of dollars to Russia's national budget. Gazprom, a proud sponsor of Putin's regime, once the bedrock of the Russian economy, now reports colossal losses. And this will become worse now that the Russian gas supplies to Europe have ended. Russian defense and security spending will rise by 1/4 next year, thus reaching 8% of GDP. 4 of every 10 budget rubles will be spent on the war machine and on the security apparatus. Military expenditures outpace education, healthcare, and social security. President Putin once spoke about Russia not again committing the mistake of Leonid Brezhnev, of spending so much on the military so as to bankrupt the Soviet Union. He's threading exactly the same path. Under such circumstances, even despots can't sleep peacefully. President Putin might well be asking himself why Monsieur al-Assad is now living in Moscow. And apparently not too good either. Apparently the food disagrees with him. Although undeniably vast, Moscow's resources are not infinite. Russia is reduced to having to import weapons from North Korea and Iran. Russia relies on China's help in circumventing Western sanctions. Russia's war against Ukraine is not a regional or European family conflict. It's a war with global ramifications. Europeans can see what the Kremlin has in store for all of us. Russia has intensified hybrid and disinformation operations against many countries, including Poland and France. Arsons, assassinations, cyber attacks. Russia is spying on our underwater energy and communication infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. Its troll armies are poisoning our democratic discourse. Putin's meddling in the elections in Moldova, Georgia and Romania are all about spreading chaos and uncertainty wherever possible. This is simple. Russia, under its current regime, is and will remain the gravest and most immediate security threat to Europe and to global world order. For all these reasons, now is not the time to give Vladimir Putin what he wants. It's high time to deter him. The world wants a normal Russia. But Russia, like the UK and France and all the other former colonial powers, needs to end its imperial chapter. Poland never participated in the colonial race. After World War II, our borders were redrawn by great powers. We had been victims of colonialism. Poland gained territories in the West at the expense of Germany, but large areas of present-day Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine, parts of the Polish state before the war, were annexed by the Soviet Union. Some, even during the Cold War, believed that these lands should be reclaimed. I met such people as a refugee in London in the 1980s. Thank God there were others who argued for accepting realities. One of them settled here near Paris, at Maison Lafitte. Jerzy Giedroyć and his L'Institut Littéraire Kultura made a huge impression on Polish and European strategic thinking. Giedroyć, himself born in Minsk in today's Belarus, convincingly insisted that the freedom and independence of countries east of our borders were in Poland's national interest, that borders, however artificial and unfairly drawn, and all borders in Europe are artificial, all of them, should be recognized and respected. That Russia, freed from colonial delusions, can become a predictable and prosperous country and a European partner. We made our peace with Germany. I look forward to the day when we can normalize our relations in a similar way with all our neighbors, including Russia. But for that to happen, Ukraine needs to win. Second, what does all this mean for Europe? As Poland takes over the presidency of the EU Council, Europe seems to be losing its momentum, its innovation, its competitive edge. In 1992, the EU share of global GDP stood at 29%. Today, it's down to 17%. It's partly because others have risen faster, not that we've declined, but still. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated our economic problems. The war in Ukraine has exposed shortcomings in European defense. Migration pressures leave us scrambling for long-term solutions. Across Europe, we all face the same problem, the same threats. They just have different local intensities. France remains a European economic, security and defense superpower. I think that Warsaw and Paris agree on the need to boost innovation, to advance on artificial intelligence, and I understand there is a very lively startup community here in Paris. And last but not least, on improving our common security. However, we in Warsaw will insist on a strong European partnership with the United States. It is, at the moment, impossible to imagine Europeans pursuing an independent path in matters of defense outside the transatlantic framework and with no strong and effective NATO. Poland agrees. Let's increase Europe's strategic responsibility and defense capabilities, but not in opposition to the US, but in strategic harmony with Washington. This will require compromises on both sides of the Atlantic. 20 years ago, in 2003, France was right about the Iraq war. It was a bad idea promised on false pretenses. You should, however, understand other countries' rationale for engagement with the United States. A non-nuclear state such as Poland needs to rely on the US. And if you try to build European military power in competition against Washington, you might once again cause a split within Europe, as at the time of the Iraq War, into new and old Europe. Such divisions serve no one, serve our adversaries, and do not advance our cause of a stronger Europe. Europe's deal with the United States up to now might be crudely characterized as follows. You help to defend us, we buy your weapons. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has made this model insufficient. If the US wants Europe to take greater responsibility for itself, it needs to accept that Europe also needs a serious military industry. And here I think our views are converging. We in Poland spend huge sums from our national budget on American equipment. Georgia have declared that they are no longer interested in European integration. Europe faces threats from Africa and the Middle East to some extent that are provoked by Russian malign influence. We should press to deny Russia the right to its military bases in Syria. These help subversive Kremlin activities in North and Sub-Saharan Africa. Moscow's actions in Africa echo its actions in Europe, undermining democracy, supporting illiberal regimes, dividing and discrediting the West. Thousands of Russian mercenaries in the now so-called, previously called Wagner Group, now charmingly renamed Africa Corps, are rewarded with access to precious metals and mineral riches. European countries risk losing their standing with African partners, which limits our ability to address irregular migration and organized crime. This threatens the security not only of Mediterranean countries, but of all of Europe. Poland will support France not only rhetorically, materially, but if need be, as in the past, militarily, in improving European security in this area. One depressing fact must be faced. Western condemnations of Putin's aggression is not always shared in other parts of the world, primarily the so-called Global South. Putin has managed to present Ukraine as a pawn of so-called NATO imperialism, turning attention away from Russia's own, clearly neo-colonial ambitions. An urgent task faces us all in raising our public diplomacy game to spell out what is really happening in Europe now. Last but not least, social media. I commend French authorities for their decision recently to detain Telegram's CEO, Mr. Pavel Durov, over his suspected complicity in allowing crimes to be committed with the help of his communication platform. And one of the crimes was to recruit people on Telegram to plan and first to document and then actually to set fires to places in Poland. But it's happened in other countries as well. And we also know the name of the GIU officer who was organizing this on the Telegram platform. The question is, do we want to regulate social media by arresting the CEOs of social media platforms? Or should we, together with the business community, work out sensible regulations that would prevent these technologies from rotting our children's brains, from turning our people against each other, and from destroying our political systems? Whether we succeed will be a true test of European sovereignty. Mesdames et Messieurs, only a few nations maintain prominence over centuries. France is one of them. What France and other such nations have in common is that they can adapt to new circumstances, but in a way that maintains their deeper identity. Poland is also one of Europe's enduring nations. This year we will be celebrating the crowning of the first king of Poland 1,000 years ago. The last 35 years have been the best in our history, speeding from bread queues and decay towards a world top 20 GDP nations in just some 1,700 weeks. The European Commission estimates that in 2025 the Polish economy will again grow by 3.5%, the fastest in the European Union. My point is that with the right policy mix, great things in Europe can happen fast. With the wrong policy mix or just introspective dithering, crisis can occur and spread no less quickly, upending lives even in places which now seem safe and secure, just like in the plague in Camus's masterpiece. As I've mentioned to you already, earlier today, as I watched with awe the fabulous restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral, and by the way, the stone was cleaned by a Polish company called IR Laser, I was filled with pride in our European heritage. The new Notre Dame is different from the one ravaged by fire. Its interior is simpler, lighter, its acoustic has changed. And yet, as I looked at the famous towers and rosettes, there was no doubt in my mind that this was the same glorious Notre Dame de Paris, which has watched over this city for almost 7 centuries. May this be a metaphor for the future of our continent, restored, renewed, reformed, but with our distinct values and identity preserved. France and Poland, acting together, can contribute to this. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le ministre,